I really enjoy countdown documentaries. One of the great fun things is that you have that anticipation of not knowing what number one's going to be, and you may have in your head that you want number one to be X, and then the one that you think is going to win appears at number 56 or something. It's an emotional roller coaster. And when I saw 101 Fast Foods That Changed the World, I thought I'd give this a watch. This was on Now TV, and there are a lot of really good things about this one. I will say, first of all, before I go into any more detail, this is not all fast food as we know it today. So it's not just burgers and fries and chicken. It's quick food. So food that doesn't take hours to prepare or isn't overly complicated. I will give a couple of examples without spoiling too much. But basically, it starts off in a very good way that kind of sets us up for what this is about. And it starts off with the first one that's mentioned, and that's jelly beans. And straight away I thought, is that a fast food? And then I kind of realised from there that we're not talking about fast food as we know it. And it talks about the history of the jelly bean, and then we get some archival documentary footage of Ronald Reagan passing around jelly beans, and apparently he really loved Jelly Bellies and would give them out at board meetings and things. And I found that very interesting, and that's the first thing I really want to praise about this, is that it's very informative. It gives us the history of most of the foods and some interesting facts about them if there's anything. And that's something that I think is quite different to how a lot of these are, because a lot of them will just talk about the contemporary approach to that fast food, but this is actually historically the 101 greatest fast foods. And it does use a lot of clips, a lot of archival footage, very, very well edited. There's a lot of content here, and I think everything works really well. So that's something that I was pleasantly surprised by. We have discussions with a lot of kind of different food experts from all walks of life. I should say that these lists have been compiled. They asked a certain number of food experts, food historians, to write their lists of the best fast foods of all time, and they then compiled those lists, and whichever ones featured the most was how this was put together. Something else that's worth mentioning as well is that this is American. This is pretty much strictly American fast food, so there are some things that are mentioned that I definitely had heard of, and there are some things that I hadn't, which is interesting, but I'd like to know kind of what it would be like differently if it was filmed purely in the UK. It does mention some other kind of foreign countries' foods, but it's done from an American perspective. But at the same time, it's very, very educational, very entertaining. There were some surprising entries. One that I will say, pineapple rings. First of all, pineapple rings are absolutely not one of the best 101 quick foods, let alone fast foods. But I definitely wouldn't consider those to be fast foods. So some of the choices I don't agree with in terms of categorization, but who am I to argue with the food industry professionals? It definitely is educational. I learned a lot about certain cuisines, things that I had heard of but didn't really know what they were. There was an entry about pig intestines, which made me feel sick. It's really fascinating. It's very well put together, very well presented documentary, full of useful, insightful, maybe not useful, but interesting, insightful information. The clips they use are all, appropriate and suitable and fascinating. Although I don't agree with some of the entries, and I don't agree with the order of a lot of the list, I'd say, I mean, who's putting pig intestines higher up the list than jelly beans? That's, don't necessarily agree with that. But yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely worth watching if you like it. It's about an hour and a half, I think, which is not too long. They do spend usually a balanced amount of time on each entry, but some of them, for example, the jelly beans one was a couple of minutes long, whereas a few of the other entries that are quite basic and don't have that much information, it's a bit more brief. So it's relatively balanced. If you like countdown shows or shows about the history of food or anything like that, I think you will like this one. Just be warned, it will make you hungry. For the most part, there are certain entries that made me want to vomit, but for the most part, Good fun, very interesting, and I'm very happy to recommend it.